Can everybody hear me okay?
Can everyone see the slides okay?
Yep. Okay.
Both sides.
Yeah.
So Nico, maybe do you want to start by introducing yourself and then take it from there?
Sure. Everybody. Working on this for the last almost 2 years. Writing.
Nico, I'm having a little trouble hearing you on my end. Not sure if that's the case for other folks.
Is that the case for everybody?
Yep, you're soft and breaking up.
All right, let me try to move to a different spot.
So we even have connectivity issues in rural America where Nico is.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You sound more clear now.
Okay.
Yeah.
This could be a better spot.
Yeah, that sounds much better.
Okay, let me start again. Good morning from, let Subarna join, our wonderful photographer. Good morning, everybody. I'm coming to you from the Western United States. My name is Nico. I've been working on the project for nearly 2 years, assisting with communications, writing and editing, as well as graphic design. I've been asked to make a small presentation about photography, and we've been brainstorming about this presentation to try to bring something a little different than the typical photography tips that you're going to see year in, year out on whatever project you're working on. You know, I'm sure everybody's received photography tips before, but this time we're going to try something new, and we're going to target certain types of photos that we think are the most useful for our project. So let's get started and look at these types of photos. And if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. Go ahead. So I think it's worth reminding everybody what is the purpose of the photography, why it's important. I think we all know, but it's always worth spelling it out and saying it out loud. Photography really is the face of the project, literally, because it shows faces, right? So as it says there, it humanizes ILRG activities. It is really important that we show people's faces, that we remind the people, not just the donors, but the people who are interested in our project, that there are, at the end of the millions of dollars spent, there are human faces and there are humans whose lives are being affected. Photography, from our perspective, also creates certain versatility. When I use the word versatility, what I mean is one photograph can be used for many different types of products. So it makes us more versatile in our communications. Not only can we use a photo for our quarterly report, which only a couple of people end up seeing, but the photo can be used for a success story. It can be used for a blog post. It can be used for some sort of design. So photography helps us. It gives us versatility to create more products. And finally, photography improves visibility, just as a blog post might. If we have better photography, then I think the blog posts, they go to more people. And I think that's a fact. Go ahead. Before I get started on these types of photographs that we are targeting, I think we can also take a moment and talk about best practices versus success stories. In my introduction, I didn't mention that I come from a success story writing background. In fact, I was a success story writing workshop facilitator. And this is a slide I pulled from one of my workshops, just because I find it interesting. It's a concept we can also apply to photography. This slide, what I use it for is to show people that when we think about success stories, impact, and transformation, we need to we need to think beyond best practices. What I'm trying to say with this slide, if we look at the best practices column, conduct meetings to decide plan of action for improved land use and resource governance. We do a lot of that, right? Those are the activities that we are expected to do in order to complete our objectives. That's what best practices are. However, those items are not success stories. Those items are not necessarily important that we photograph as we would want to photograph something for a success story. If you look on the right, then maybe land and resource governance becomes more transparent and inclusive. That is the impact. That is the success story. Now, if we can find a way to connect what I just said under success story with a human, that is even more important. So I just wanted to show this slide for that reason. When we think about success stories, when we think about the stories that we want to tell in these blog posts and these products that we're creating, we need to think beyond just our best practices. The best practice is something that we include in our writings and our stories, but it's not the end result. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Nico. I think, the way I look at this is the best practices maybe sort of what we're doing here and how we're doing it. Whereas on the right, what we really want to be trying to show is the impact. So the success. And that impact is often, you almost see it in the face of an individual and the emotion that's carried out and what's happening behind it. I don't know if that's sort of correct in what you're getting at as well, but that's sort of how I'm seeing these two different pieces.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. We're using these high-tech methods to document and register land titles and customary lands, but the success story is the family that feels secure now to make an investment in their land, or the two families that now live peacefully side by side, or whatever impact that that best practice has made. Exactly. Now, we could always include the description of these practices in our blog posts and in our stories, but the family the family has the faces that we want to photograph. I guess that's what the end point of this slide is just a reminder that the success stories really are impacts that we make on people, right? Okay, do you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, instead of just photography tips, this time we're going to try something different for everybody. We're going to talk about 4 types of photography, and I think at the end of the day, depending on your activity with ILRG, some of you can go for all 4. Now, I know some of the activities don't necessarily involve land titles, like in India, for example, but I encourage everybody to take note and make it their goal to try to bring us one of each of these photos, for example. This is sort of the reason we designed the presentation this way, is because it gives you something to work towards and say, okay, I'm going to get each type of photo over the next, 3 to 6 months. So we have the 4 types of photos right here: portraits, livelihoods, land titles, and group photos. Now let's go into each one of those types. Go ahead, Dan. Okay, the first one and the most important one are portraits. And, and I believe a lot of you have been taking portraits already for ILRG. All these 3 photos are witness to that, because I think they're from people who are here in this group. Faces are the most important and useful photo we can use in communications. As I mentioned before, the face is what shows the human. It's what makes the connection with the reader. And that's why we take portraits. It's important that your portrait is of high quality, right? We want to take our portraits not too close, not too far away. There's a lot of ways that you can take a portrait. It can be horizontal, it can be vertical. We leave that up to you. But the idea is that the person knows that their portrait is being taken. They can pose. how do portraits tell a larger story? Well, part of the story of the portrait beyond the face is also where the person is standing. Oh, somebody. So the
Yeah,
back,
we've got that part. Don't worry. We'll get people joining and leaving.
yeah, no worries. So the backdrop helps the telling of the story. And so you can think strategically, well, if it's a person in their field, obviously that's a good backdrop because it shows the person is a farmer. If it's a person who has received a land title, maybe the backdrop is the person's home, showing that the person has a home. So think about the backdrop as part of the larger story. And then the other part are the hands. If you take a portrait where you're showing the hands, you can also make this part of the story. As you see in these examples here, the man with the cocoa in his hands and the other man has seeds. They both tell me right away that we're dealing with farmers with certain types of crops. So it gives me information right away that I don't have to also read. It helps tell part of the story. Okay, shall we go to the next photo type, or does anybody have any questions about portraits? No? Okay, next photo type, livelihoods. So we thought you've probably heard photography tips about getting photos that show action. Instead of saying that this time, we're going to say we want a livelihoods photo. We all know what a livelihood is. It basically means this person's job or this person's way of making an income and supporting their family. On our project, I think that 99% of the livelihoods are agriculture related. And so we're looking for any type of agriculture photo. People engaged in one of the processes, one of the many processes of agriculture, planting, weeding, harvesting, processing. Even further, we can even take it further where they're taking stuff to market, selling things in the market. Anything that is part of the day-to-day livelihood of that person, that photo we are looking for. Why? Well, if we have the portrait and we have the livelihood photo, then we connect an even larger story. You see, with each photo, we can tell more and more about this person. For these photos, I write a tip on this slide. Wide angle includes landscapes. So if you back up and you include the landscape, it can be really interesting. This wonderful photo from somebody in India, I can't remember the person's name, you'll have to forgive me. I don't think it's Subarna. This photo was chosen by USAID, the one on the left, for the climate linked annual calendar. So congratulations. And it's a wonderful photo with great composition, shows a wider landscape, tells the story. We know exactly what this person is doing. They're working in a field. This is their livelihood. Anyway, congratulations to that person. And I think Thais is going to tell me the name. Oh, it is Subarna's photo. Okay, I take that back. It was the other one that was not Subarna. So good job, Subarna. Great composition. Okay, so that is the second type of ILRG photo that we're looking for, the livelihood. Shall we go to the third type, Daniel? Okay, this is one of our favorites, the land title photo. This one, Matt Somerville is especially good at. The land title photo is what it is, right? It's people who have received their land titles. We want to document it in a way that includes a portrait of them holding the land title. I mean, a land title photo is basically a portrait photo. They're very similar, only that we want them holding their land title. They can be standing in front of their house. They can be standing in front of their village, as you see the woman on the left. Because the land title photo really tells the ILRG story in a way that other photos can't. And so if you have your beneficiaries receiving land titles, for those of you in the countries where we have achieved a lot of land titles. These are the type of photos we want.
Yeah. Nico, I might just add two quick things
Please.
on here.
Thanks,
And even when the title or the document isn't the product, oftentimes you have people looking at or engaging with maps. So anything you can use that shows a beneficiary interacting with a piece of paper or some form of anything else, and the land itself creates a potentially powerful image. And generally that includes, as Nico said before, people's hands either pointing at something and engaging, one person pointing at something and the other looking at that. So I think it's quite important to think about that in composition, particularly because a lot of these tend to be posed shots, as Nico sort of implied. Even as I look at these, though, what you'll often find is that when people are posing, you'll find some discrepancies or things. So, for example, I've seen a number of these shots where when someone holds up their document, they're holding it upside down. Well, that's effectively going to make it not usable in this context. We do blur out names, but even as I look at this photo on the bottom right, and I can't remember this woman's name in Chifunda Chiefdom, but when I look at it, I see, wait a second, looks like he's holding about 10 certificates and she's holding, about 15. What's going on in this situation? And so I think, you do need to always look at what's there. If you see this, I particularly put them in front of this church because the light was harsh, and I looked at the words on that church and said, okay, that's all right. I've got another photo that this whole conversation was just reminding me of, where it's a great photo, but the individual is wearing a T-shirt, and I'll show it to you a little bit later. Everyone's perfect, but his T-shirt says on it, "I steal music off the internet." So and political ads, when there's an election going around, we've had to purposefully sort of put people's certificates over words and faces that would relay something else. So yeah, I just wanted to note that when you're posing pictures like this, feel free to tell people to put down other pieces of paper, feel free to ask them to point, and do make sure you see what they're wearing.
Yeah, I think you should feel free to intervene. You can help people with their posture, the way they're standing. Don't be timid. I think a lot of photographers, they get really timid about taking photos of people. I mean, if the person has already agreed to be in your photo, then you want to make it the best you can make it. I think you need to feel like you can move the person to the position that you want to move them to, and if you have to move an arm, if you have to move a hand, then do it. And as Megan just pointed out, I think it's worth saying to everybody, we don't want to show personal information on these land titles. I know it can be very difficult if you have a really nice camera. And so at the end of the day, we may have to blur some of that information, names and ID numbers, for example. So
we'd take it, though. I would say don't make your photo blurry. We'd rather blur it from this side rather than ask you to blur people at the moment.
Yeah.
Particularly with these photos, and even your cell phone cameras, taking a picture from 3-4 meters away will still be able to read all the text on the certificates. So, yep.
Okay, should we go to the final type of photo? And the final type of photo is the group photo. We love the group photo. The group photo shows collaboration. The group photo shows community. The group photo shows coordination. What we're seeing though from a lot of people is we're getting groups of 20, 30, 15 people. And what I would like to do for this certain task of the group photo is let's keep the groups fewer than 4 to 5 people. I think these photos here are great examples of group photos. They're all showing a certain action. You can see more or less at least half of the face of each person. It's very important that we don't include backs and the backs of heads. If there are a lot of people looking in the group photo and maybe one person has the back showing, then it could be useful still. But usually if there is a back of a head, then we just discard the photo and we don't want to use it. You want to see a little bit of the face of each person. And so it's a tricky endeavor. It's something that requires a little bit of patience. It's not just plop down and take the photo. Sometimes you have to wait. These people are in motion, they're doing something, and you have to try to capture the photo at the exact moment when you want, when it should be captured. So this requires some patience in photography.
I might also add that this and really with all of them is the composition of the group is important as well. A group of all men may not be particularly interesting. We're going to prefer a group where you can understand and see the relationship between different people. A group where there's two men who are like in this one on the top taking notes and doing the active field work, but if you had a woman passively on the side, that might not tell the story. So we do need to consider our our objectives here and find photos where we're pushing limits. You might find a younger woman in a position of power. So do consider who is in your photos in these group pictures and what story we're trying to tell. I think the one other piece, and maybe this goes for all landscape ones, and maybe it's implied, but if either of these photos had a random person in the background, they would probably be, not useful. So you really do need to compose and just think about what's in the background. Now, what I'll tend to do, particularly when I'm out there and you got kids and everyone running around, is I'll make sure I'm taking a few photos where the kids are in the background or where people who are trying to jump in, but then I will make sure that at that same time I've captured photos that are exclusive. So sorry, given that we can throw out old photos, don't be afraid. Also, I would say, you get the drunk guy who wants to be in every photo. Take some photos with that person and then move on to the next, the next group without him or her. So, yeah, sorry, I might be getting too detailed there. I was just thinking of the situations that led to these photos.
Right. No, it's sound advice.
And
what you're saying is that the children, I've come across that as well. So sort of scratch that itch right away. Instead of saying no or trying to avoid it, just do it, get it over with, and then they won't be interested in being in a photo.
Yep. Yeah. In both of these cases, there were dozens, if not hundreds of people in the near vicinity. And yet we sort of have created a vision of, seclusion.
Yeah. Very nice. That's very interesting. Okay. So that wraps up the types of photos. Does anybody have a question? Do you think we can get all 4 types of photos? That is the challenge, the ILRG challenge for the next quarter, is to try to get one of each of these photos. Does anybody have a question? I think there is a question. I see a hand raised. Patricia.
Hi, Nico.
Hello. How are you?
Nice to hear your voice.
Yeah, nice to hear your voice.
To meet you, I've not heard your voice before, so I'm glad to put the voice to the name.
Thank
And the types of photos you've talked about so far, they seem to be oriented towards the success story, as you are putting it. But I'm just wondering, there's some pictures that may not be telling the success story, but is probably speaking to a situation, or they are telling the problem actually, but to that problem is where the program is probably trying to respond. Do you need such pictures or not? Like, for instance, a picture that will talk about deforestation, for instance, and probably to that picture, there's going to be a success story because the program is trying to do something around the issue. So do you think those types of pictures are useful? Then on the posing part of it, I'm actually thinking that the best picture is probably a picture that is not posed, a picture that talks or speaks to the reality as it is. Somebody didn't pause for it. You just captured it because it was happening right there. So I don't know what to say to that, but I just think, and most of the pictures that you've shown so far seems to be those pictures where people are aware and that you're taking a picture of them, and you have control and you tell them what to do, how to stand, and the like. But I think that sometimes pictures where people aren't even aware, but it's a good picture, and maybe you speak to them later about the picture you took and whether you can use that picture, but it's much more in their natural setting than posing. So just those two comments. I don't know what you think.
Sure. Yeah. To your first comment, yes, you bring up a very good example, the example of deforestation or the use of these natural resources. How can we photograph that? It's not an easy task. It's not easy to take photos of degraded forests. Oftentimes you see a degraded forest, you take a photo, and then you look at the photo on your computer, and there's just not much there because it's degraded, because all the trees have been cut down, and the photo is just not that interesting. If you think about deforestation, there's other ways to depict it. What are the trees used for? They're probably used for charcoal, for example. So finding a photo of somebody using charcoal might be a better way to depict deforestation.
Okay.
But yes, I think that trying to take photographs of the issues, we definitely welcome that. We want you to do that. Just because the presentation is concentrating on these 4 types of photos doesn't mean you shouldn't try to get photos of other things. Feel free to take all the photos you want. We welcome all types of photos. And especially these photos about issues that you're mentioning. They are important and they are useful. They can be used in blog posts. They can be used in success stories, showing people the issues and not just describing them with words is also very helpful. To your second comment, I want to add that, let's see, your comment was, it seems that all these photos are posed. Can we also take, or what do you think about photos in their natural state? Well, the photos that are posed tend to be easier to achieve. And that's why I made these types of photos, and I'm showing these examples because they also turn out to be the best photos we have. Not only are they easier to achieve, but they're also better in general. Why are they better? It's because it's a controlled environment. We also really appreciate any type of smile, and we appreciate eyes looking at the lens. I think that might be the key right there, is that when it is a posed, controlled photo, the person's eyes are looking at the lens, helping us make that connection with the reader or the person who's looking at the photo. If you can get the person to smile, then you've won the contest. There you go. You are the development photographer. We'd love to see smiles in the photos. It's something that the donor, USAID, also loves to see. Happy people is a happy donor. Matt, do you want to maybe chime in on Patricia's?
2 quick points. And I think Patricia's right, though. There is an intangible piece here, and I don't want to discourage anyone from taking action shots or photos that tell a particular story they're trying to get in. Particularly, and I'm just sharing a screen real quick, maybe it'll come up. And I've got a better picture of this, but sometimes you will find yourself in a particular situation, particularly when someone is saying something, a quote or making a statement. This is the chief's representative for Nialugwe chiefdom, and he just happened to be making a statement, in the same place I was sitting, that had the USAID logo, the Kamako logo in the background, and was sort of part of a story. A few minutes later, someone else was in a position where, we had a logo and they were saying something and there was a map on the screen. So I do think, Patricia, you do want to capture those candid situations where you're thinking that, oh, this really tells the story perfectly. And I think to your photo of M Finance with the 2 women interacting while, accessing some money from the financial literacy work. So I think you need to be ready for those. And if your eye captures those spaces, and particularly when you hear something inspiring and you can get a quote, do try to capture it. So just because we're giving you these 4 examples of things we're looking for doesn't mean you shouldn't be capturing the bigger picture. And particularly when you're writing, a process document, yes, do capture pictures of the process that we can put in there, because nothing's more boring than the 34-page document I'm reading today that doesn't have a single picture in it. So it doesn't all have to be successes. You can be telling the story in other ways. But yep, that's a little bit beyond this this particular
I hope
training.
that's not my document.
It is, and it's not too boring. We'll get photos for it.
Patricia, I was trying to think of another example of the issues. So you brought up deforestation. There's also the example of gender equality, right? How can we take photos of gender equality, or take photos that we can use to tell these stories about gender equality? I think oftentimes for women, you can take photos of women with their families in their homes, doing the things that women typically do in a certain society, be that, working in the home, cooking these are great photos that can be used as we tell these stories.
Though we'd rather see pictures of men cooking and men looking after children.
If we can get a man cooking, we'd accept that too. So go ahead, Tice.
I would like to raise something that it might be controversial, but it's something that I struggle with, and maybe others do as well. How can we go about taking photos of the people we work with, avoiding a really neo-colonial relationship and portray? I struggle with posing people or directing people, over directing, because I feel really bad as an outsider or a perceived white person really manipulating people as if they are props. Is this something that other folks struggle with, and how can we go about to avoid that?
In my experience, I think it's a personal thing what you're describing. I think that you can make a connection, you know, even if it's the first time you've met this person. I think that it's worth, you know, shaking their hand, greeting them in their language, you know, doing the social customs that must be done when you meet somebody. Maybe that will make you feel less conspicuous. Does anybody else have any ideas?
I think it's a read of the situation as well. And, you know, a group meeting after a meeting or I guess in a group meeting, people are often taking photos on their cell phones, or in the worst case scenarios, recording the whole meeting on their cell phone. So I think you need to sort of pick the locations and the times. In the case, a lot of times I'll make sure to take many more pictures of folks than I would otherwise, and I'll take pictures on a smartphone and do WhatsApp. We'll send folks the WhatsApp pictures just afterwards, while, if there's a fancier camera or whatever, a lot of times those photos don't reach back. So yeah, I agree. It's a personal thing, and that's oftentimes why we bring in hired photographers who feel less uncomfortable for their
Maybe
job.
that's why all my photos suck as well. Because I always feel there's this asymmetrical, like we can shake the asymmetrical power relationship that there is. Yeah, maybe I overthink this.
Maybe you overthink it, but maybe you need to take more photos, and then at least one of them will come out. If you don't feel comfortable shuffling people around, putting your hands on their shoulders to turn them in the right position, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then perhaps you just need to take a larger amount of photos to make sure you get that one that you really do like. Photos that aren't posed, for example, because for people that aren't trained in photography or with the experience, it usually it requires that you take more photos in order to capture the one that is the best. The more you take, the higher your chances are.
And I guess the 2 points there is that from our side, we don't want to see every photo taken. We'd rather that culling be done in some ways by the folks taking it. So if a photo is bad, don't share it on the Google Drive. And as Megan Dooley notes, the policy of not using photos of children, particularly children alone. If a child is with a family and the consent is there for the family, feel free. Or if it's a photo of children playing in the distance, that's okay. But we are not in the position to do portraits of kids unless we have some really explicit consent from the parents. And I think the second important consent piece is particularly around gender-based violence, or any cases where women's or men's identity shouldn't be known, or it's not something that should be made publicly available. I'll take the case of Zambia, where law enforcement officers in the wildlife sector, we've particularly taken pictures of them from the back and tried not to use location identification information. But so sometimes it's strategic. Yeah, please.
Yeah, with kids, sometimes it's impossible not to have a photo with a kid, because especially women are carrying the kids, their bodies, or breastfeeding, or the kids are near their mothers. So one thing that I tried in Mozambique was to take shots where the kids have their backs to the camera. I know you just said, Nico, not to have people's backs to the camera, but when the kids are at least not showing their face, so the kids are looking sideways, so we can see the adults, but we cannot see the children. And yes, photos for photos from the back are sometimes are useful for when it's used, for instance, to illustrate the brief on gender-based violence. We wanted photos, but we didn't want any photos of a portrait, somebody's face. So we used photos of women from the back.
Thank you.
I'll show you some photos at some point of, we had a photographer who we told that to, and he then positioned everyone in a family photo with all the adults looking forward and the children facing backwards. So half of the group was forward, half of the group was backwards. So it's important to interpret it.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah.
Naturally looking though at the same time. I guess that's the key, is that we do want things to look natural even if they are posed. And maybe that's a contradiction.
Yes. Any other comments about these types of photos? We do have a couple slides about photography tips. You know, we weren't going to leave you without the photography tips. So if you want, we can move on to the next one. Here we go. This is a slide that we created with the help of Matt in the last photography tip booklet that we created. What are the types of photos that we could avoid? Well, blurry photos is an obvious one. Photos with shadows in the backs of heads. Workshop photos, although Matt gave an example where, well, it's okay to document a workshop to show that it's been done, and you may actually find a useful photo out of a workshop. But let's try to keep workshop photos to a minimum and only use the ones that meet the standards. That is, they're not blurry, they're not washed out, they're not backlit. And then the large group photos, and I want to make a comment about large group photos. Groups like to be in a large group photo, and it's fine to do it. It's just not a photo that we can readily use. It's okay to do it. Again, it's one of those situations where, well, you want to do it just to make a group feel like they're being photographed, and it's a nice feeling to be in a group photograph. It's, you know, it's empowering for a lot of communities to do something like this, and so it's good to do it. Matt?
Nope, agreed 100%. And your often solution to blurry photos, people often complain about their phone, but the reality is that 80–90% of the time, it's just that you have not wiped off the lens on your camera of your phone. So you can, just use a cloth and wipe off the camera lens, and that will oftentimes really improve the blurriness.
Right, right. And hold it steady. Okay, let's go to the next one, Daniel. I'm just going to give you a few tips. This is a typical one. Put the sun behind you. I think you've all heard this before. We want the sun to be behind you, the photographer, not behind the subject. Next.
If I can come back on that,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
that point as well, is the time of day is crucial. You're going to get a better photo on a little bit of an overcast day. Sometimes your blue days will be great, but early mornings and evenings often give you some of the best chance to get sunlight on people's face, rather than middle of the day. You're going to get sunlight that will often hurt the face or make the face not able to be seen. So recognize that sometimes, the conditions outside just aren't great for your photos. So you do need to consider whether to put someone in an open field or under a bit of shade, or even inside sometimes, although generally you don't want to be taking too many inside photos. Thanks.
And I think for this one, you feel free to take several test photos, test the camera and see if this certain position or the shading is working. Look at the photo. If it's on your cell phone, on your mobile phone, you can look at the photo and say, okay, that was pretty good light. Let's try a different angle. Feel free to do that. All right, next slide. Choose a format. I think that the way the type of photo you're taking, you know, landscape photos are typically horizontal. Portraits, these posed photos, are typically vertical. So keep that in mind. You could try it both ways if you want. You could try a vertical and a horizontal on a certain subject, but you know, try to choose that beforehand so you know exactly what you're going after. Okay, next one. In photography workshops, a lot of times you talk about the position of the photographer. I included this little photo here because it can be an issue with today's cell phones and the way you hold your camera. And I mean, every mobile phone is a little bit different, but usually you have to tap on the front of the screen to get the photo. And so it's something to keep in mind that you want to be square, your body, try not to be off balance. It can also be dangerous. You know, we don't want you to fall. We don't want you to step back. You have no idea how many people die every year taking photos, walking backwards and falling off of cliffs and bridges and things. It's actually really sad. So be square. Make sure you're in a solid position when you take your photo. It's worth saying, and it's worth remembering. Yeah. Down below, I say try not to feel awkward asking for a variety of photos. Here you, as the photographer, again, you can try a person standing, and then if you don't like that, well, maybe the person should be sitting with their land title in their lap. That might be an interesting photo. You know, take a variety, and that ensures that you'll get the photo that you like and the photo that is the most useful. Okay, next one. Okay, I think the positioning, this is probably one of the most important photography tips. And I think Matt does a really good job of positioning. We want the lowest we want you to be in terms of you, the photographer, with your subject is at eye level. We never want you, the photographer, to be above your subject, looking down. So if your subject is short, then you need to bend down and get at their eye level or even below them. One trick in photography is to take photos of your subject upwards towards them. Sometimes you get a nice sky behind that person. I think if you go back to the, Daniel, if you can go back to the land title slide real fast. I know that photo is an example. The woman there, you see how much lower the photographer is than the woman. What we never want to see is that we are above them. It just doesn't make a nice photo. It makes the person seem diminished. They're photos that just do not work. You cannot look down and take a photo of somebody on the ground and expect it to be a good photo. If the person is on the ground, then you have to get down on your knees at that person's level. Now, the photo that Suvarna took of the working in the field, that's an exception because it's an action photo. It's not us looking at her face. That's an exception. But if we're taking photographs of faces, yes, we never ever want to be above the person. Matt, would you like to say something on that positioning?
No, as a short person,
Okay.
it's pretty easy for me.
That's why all your photos are so well positioned.
I thought you're making a short joke.
But yeah, no, it's really important, and I want everybody to keep that in mind as they try to get these 4 types of photos. Okay, is there another slide, Daniel? I can't remember.
Yeah,
No.
so I think we were going to quickly go into photo consent, but before we do that, are there any other questions for Nico on anything he covered? And I can't see people's hands, so feel free to jump in if that's the case. No?
There are no hands up at the moment.
Okay.
Good.
Great. Well, first of all, just a quick note. Thanks, Nico, so much for covering all that ground. On the photography piece, we originally were thinking about doing a combined training today on photos and best practices around that, but also on marking and branding. But I think we have some flexibility in the training schedule. We covered some good ground on photography today, so we'll turn to branding and marking at one of the future trainings. But we did want to make sure that we discussed photo consent. It's incredibly important. It gets at some of the issues that Thais was mentioning earlier. For those who haven't worked with me yet, my name is Dan Myers. I'm one of the deputy project managers, along with Timur for ILRG. I think I've worked with almost all of you, but saw a couple of names of colleagues who I don't think I've had the pleasure of working with yet. So good to be with you. So this is an abbreviated version of a much more complex and potentially thorny topic than we have time to cover in 7 minutes. But I'll kind of get the ball rolling here and go over some of the best practices for obtaining photo consent, and then we can maybe follow up via email, or you can always reach out to me directly if you have questions. So first off, it's incredibly important when we're taking pictures to explain to the participant why the photos are being taken and to ask for their permission while granting them sufficient time to take and to use the photo for communications purposes for ILRG. So among the key information that you should be providing is where the photos
I've lost you, Dan. Not sure about others.
Yes, same.
Yeah,
Okay. Until Dan's back.
Oh,
We lost
Can
you
you
for a
hear me?
moment, Dan.
can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so I was saying among the key information to provide on kind of what these photos will ultimately be used for, we do need to caution participants that although ILRG won't be using photos after a period of 5 years or so in our communications materials, once those photos are online, it's difficult for us to restrict their spread. So that's kind of an inherent risk of giving consent as a participant for us to use these photos. That said, participants do have a right to be forgotten, so they can ask at any point for us to delete photos that we've taken. Of course, again, with the caveat that some of those photos are going to be already on the internet, in which case we'll make every best effort to restrict their use, but there's no guarantee there. And then importantly, and I think this gets back to the question of power imbalances that Thais raised, we really should be taking pains to reiterate that participants will not gain anything or lose anything in terms of money, material support from the project or anything like that by either accepting or declining to have their photo taken. This has to be a voluntary process. So along with that, we do have a variety of ways that we need to be sure that informed consent is being taken. You can see the link here to the ILRG policy for ethical use of content that has a helpful written template for obtaining informed consent. And we'll send around the slides after the presentation so that you can access that directly if you've forgotten where to find it. So I'll go into the situations in which verbal or written consent is more appropriate. But just to remember that when taking verbal consent, maybe in a situation where cultural or literacy barriers restrict the ability that we have to obtain written consent, we do want to be recording the name of people who are appearing, especially in kind of those close-up portrait images that Nico was referring to. And yeah, using recording or a written confirmation by a staff person to confirm that we did obtain effective verbal consent. So the general rule of thumb, again, we're a little short on time, but consent is not typically needed when we're dealing with a public figure. So maybe a chief at a large meeting, when we're dealing with large crowds or individuals whose identity is not easily recognizable. So someone wearing a face mask, perhaps, or is far in the distance of a photo. We do need to obtain verbal consent during general project activities and when pictures are taken without any specific promotional material in mind. But when we're taking a portrait image or a close-up of someone, it's really important to both document that person's name, but also obtain written consent for the use of their story, of the picture itself in our communications materials, especially in the case of people who might be coming from vulnerable groups, so experiencing gender-based violence, refugees, or marginalized ethnic minorities. So a few not super clear examples of those three principles. So this photo on the left, you can see a large group of people, difficult to distinguish individual faces, so consent would not be needed. For verbal consent, you have here a relatively large group photo of a general project activity. So we want everyone in the photo to verbally consent, but we don't need necessarily a documentation for that. And then finally, the example on the right of the need for written consent. This is a close-up portrait of two of our participants. And of course, we'll be blurring out personal identifying information on the documents in question, but very important to get their consent to participate. After obtaining consent, it's incredibly important that we make a genuine effort to share the photo with the people involved. This shouldn't just be something that we're using to benefit the project without keeping the person whose image we're kind of using as a face of the project informed of the implications of that. And then this is really important. Country managers should be storing all of those digitized and signed consent forms or recordings of verbal consent for up to 5 years after they're taken. That makes it really important to accurately record both participants' names, the date they were taken, and to label them in connection with any stories that were shared. And finally, just a reminder, when submitting these photos, you can either go through this ILRG photo story link, again, that will be in the slides that we'll send around, or you can use this QR code to submit photos directly through ODK. So you have those two options. Again, it's always helpful to provide as much information as we can with these photos. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that. And I see we're maybe a couple minutes over, so I'll stop there. Apologies to have to run through the consent portion, but we can discuss further, or you can always reach out to any member of the team if you have any questions.
Yeah, two things. Even if you don't feel comfortable with the ODK or the photo story link, and you think you have a great photo you'd love to use, please do feel free to even send by email. Megan Dooley is sort of and Nico are cataloging the library. Everyone should have a link to that library so that you can use photos from your particular countries in that. So that will be another follow-up on our part. But yeah, do collect those photos, and if any of these photos have a good quote from the individual with them, we do want to know who the individuals are, particularly if they're close up, so that we can make sure that they're highlighted and that their story is told in their own words. Final point from my side, and sorry, I didn't realize we weren't getting to branding, but branding is really important. So any chance to have USAID's logo either front and center or in the background is appreciated. You can often tell, and sometimes I carry around a few USAID branded pieces and hand them over, and then I take them back, which to Thais's point is pretty exploitative. But with groups of people who I'm friendly with team members, I'll make sure that when I'm in the field and planning on doing a story or photography, that folks are branded. You know, teams may have a USAID branded shirt that they don't happen to be wearing that day. So I do have some posed photos. Same thing, frankly, with Tetra Tech. You know, if anybody has any Tetra Tech gear and gets a photo of that, Tetra Tech's always happy to include. But Tetra Tech and USAID should never be in the same, I guess, photo or image. Since our work is USAID, it's, you know, USAID can't use it if it says Tetra Tech on it at the same time. I may be rushing through this too quickly, but we do also, you know, in some of our public-private partnerships or even grantees, they should, you know, they can co-brand. We'll go into that, and having both brands together or multiple brands together is okay. If a group is a subcontractor, they are not allowed to use their brand adjacent to USAID. So it's something that we just have to have in our minds as we photograph. And that's way too much information for 2 minutes. But I hope you get the point that you know, having USAID branding is helpful. Each of the country teams, you may want to consider a teardrop banner. That or a pull-up banner. I know India has a lot of banners, but I tend to like to use reusable a banner of USAID so that we can pull it around every event and don't need to sort of create a new banner for each event in case we're doing posed photos.
Yeah.
Probably
No,
too much. There you go.
No, that's all. Those are good, good reminders on branding. And just to reiterate, we will make sure that we get to branding and marking in sufficient detail in one of our future trainings. Just wanted to make sure we did justice to the photo piece here, and we will address the points Matt raises about, you know, the use of logos, all of that in an upcoming training. But I see we're a bit over time, so thanks very much, Nico and Matt and the rest of the team. And we'll send around the recording and post it on the YouTube channel for ILRG as well. But of course, feel free to reach out if you have any questions that weren't addressed during the presentation. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nico. Thanks, Dan. And thanks everyone who's submitted a photo or more to date. You know, it's putting you in charge of telling the story of the people you're working with and elevating their experiences. So keep it up.